They said my wedding wasn't worth their time. My own mother looked me in the eye and said, "This is a waste for someone like you." Then they flew to Hawaii, with my sister and her kids. On the same day, I walked myself down the aisle. No call, no text, just Facebook photos of them smiling on the beach, raising their glasses in a toast to family priorities. But that's not the worst part. 1 week later, my father, who hadn't spoken more than 5 words to me in months, called in a panic. His investment property was failing. Loan payments hadn't been made. The bank was threatening foreclosure. He needed me to transfer $40,000 fast. And here's the part you won't believe. 3 years ago, he begged me to co-sign that loan. I was naive, desperate for his approval. I said yes. And now, I was the one the bank was coming after. But this time, I wasn't the same girl. I didn't beg. I didn't bend. I told him exactly what he and my mother told me about my wedding. Don't call me about worthless things. This is the story of how I stopped chasing the love of people who never valued me, and how I made sure they would never use me again. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you're going to understand exactly what changed inside me and why I have no regrets. Ready? Let me tell you what really happened. Claire Hammond was 29, a wedding photographer based in Boston. Her apartment, modest but warm, stood in contrast to the elegant, cold mansion where she had grown up. On her living room wall hung dozens of carefully framed photographs, not of herself or her family, but of strangers, captured moments of love, emotion, and connection. She photographed other people's joy for a living, and sometimes wondered if it was because she'd spent most of her life learning what joy looked like from the outside. She had become very good at watching. Claire had grown up in a stately colonial-style home just outside of Boston, nestled in a wealthy suburb lined with sycamore trees, private schools, and pristine lawns. From the outside, it was the picture of success. Inside, it was a quiet competition Claire never asked to join. Her father, Richard, was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm. Her mother, Evelyn, managed a large hospital known in their social circle for her tightly organized charity galas and immaculate taste. Her older sister, Melissa, was a star from the beginning, valedictorian cheer captain, now a respected surgeon at Mass General. Claire was creative. That was the word people used. "She's very creative," her mother would say at cocktail parties when asked what Claire was up to. It was always followed by a quick change of subject, usually to Melissa's latest accomplishment, or her upcoming trip to a medical conference. Claire had long learned how to smile politely in those moments, but that didn't mean they didn't hurt. As a child, Claire never questioned the imbalance. She just thought love had rules, and Melissa had figured them out first. She remembered vividly how their mother would brag about Melissa's math scores at dinner parties, while Claire's art awards were barely acknowledged. One time, Claire won a local competition for a drawing she'd spent weeks perfecting. It was displayed in the town hall. When she brought home the ribbon, Evelyn glanced at it and said, "Well, that's nice, but Melissa just got invited to the state science fair." Claire never argued. She simply folded the ribbon and tucked it into the back of her drawer next to the others. The most vivid memory, though, came from when Claire was 6. Melissa had just received an award at school, a golden trophy for academic excellence. Their mother was radiant, fussing over Melissa's hair, adjusting her blouse, making sure the lighting was just right as she took photos with their disposable Kodak camera. Claire, holding a paper certificate for most improved in reading, approached quietly. "Mama," she said, lifting her arms. "Can I have a hug?" Evelyn didn't even turn her head. "Not now, Claire. Don't ruin the shot." Claire remembered the way the words had sunk into her chest, cold and sharp. She remembered how her arms fell to her sides and how she walked back to the corner of the gymnasium where her backpack sat. That moment wasn't a single wound. It was the beginning of a slow erosion of confidence, of self-worth, of feeling visible. Years later, that photograph still existed, framed in the hallway of her parents' home. Melissa stood in the center, smiling proudly. Evelyn crouched beside her with one arm around her waist. Claire was there too, off to the side, blurry, caught mid-step, half turned away from the camera. Even in the family photos, she was always just out of frame. Now, sitting in her apartment, Claire sipped her coffee and stared at that same image on her phone. She had taken a picture of the original frame during a brief visit last Christmas. It had been meant as a joke, something to show Ben, her then-boyfriend. Find the shadow, she had said, pointing herself out in the corner. But he hadn't laughed. He had looked at her instead, quiet, concerned. Did they really never make you feel like you belonged? She hadn't answered then. She didn't need to. That morning, Claire was preparing client galleries for delivery wedding photos full of happy tears and tight embraces, father-daughter dances, mothers zipping up gowns, all the things she had learned to capture from the outside. Her lens knew how to focus on intimacy she had never received. There was an irony to it all, one she had grown used to. She checked her inbox. A message from a new bride gushing with praise for the way Claire had captured the soul of the ceremony. Claire smiled. She loved her work. Photography had become the one place where she felt seen, where her perspective mattered. Behind the lens, she had value. Still, there were days like this one where that little girl inside her would whisper, "If you had been better, they would have loved you too." Claire stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out an old photo album. She flipped to the pages from childhood birthdays, holidays, school plays. In every image she was there, but just barely. Never the center, always looking at someone else. She lingered on a group shot, Melissa front and center in her high school graduation gown, Richard and Evelyn beaming with pride. Claire was again off to the side, holding a camera. She hadn't realized it then, but even as a teenager she had started documenting other people's moments because no one was capturing hers. She ran her finger along the edge of the photo. For years, she had accepted the idea that she was somehow less gifted, less important, less lovable. But lately that belief had begun to crack. She had built a life, a career, found love in someone who saw her fully, who never asked her to prove her worth. Maybe that meant she hadn't been the problem. Still, that picture haunted her. And it would come to mean something very different when months later she'd be told her wedding was a waste of time for someone like you. But that was still to come. For now, she simply closed the album and whispered more to herself than to the room I was always there. They just chose not to see me. And this time she chose not to disappear. Claire had always known she saw the world differently. It wasn't just a feeling. It was how light hit her eyes at dusk, how the shadows moved when no one else was watching, how emotion lingered on a stranger's face long after a conversation had ended. But she didn't have a name for that way of seeing until she picked up a camera. It began the summer before her sophomore year of high school. Her Uncle Jeff, visiting from out of state, had brought an old Canon AE1 with him, found it in a box in the attic, he'd said, casually handing it to Claire. Figured someone artistic might make better use of it than letting it collect dust. From the moment she held it, Claire felt something shift. The camera wasn't new. Its leather strap was cracked and the lens had a scratch, but it fit in her hands like it had been waiting there. That week, she started wandering. Alone, mostly. Through the park by the Charles River, around the old neighborhoods near Back Bay. She snapped shots of pigeons scattering kids playing lovers holding hands on benches. She'd wait hours just to catch the perfect angle of sunlight breaking through the trees. At school, she spent her lunch breaks in the dark room, inhaling the metallic scent of developer fluid, watching her images appear like magic on paper. She felt free there, in control. Invisible, but in the best way. But at home, that joy had no place. When Richard found the negatives drying on a clothesline she'd strung across her bedroom, he raised an eyebrow. "Are you doing this for a school project?" "No," Claire said. "Just for fun. I like it." He frowned, not unkindly, but with a quiet finality. "Just don't let it distract you from real things. That kind of hobby won't get you into college." Evelyn was less subtle. One evening, when Claire was sorting through prints in the dining room, her mother walked in and sighed loudly. "Do you really need to make such a mess every time you get in one of your moods?" "It's not a mood," Claire said softly. "I'm learning how to frame light, Evelyn gave a tight smile. And what does that even mean, sweetheart? It just sounds like you're avoiding people again. This obsession isn't normal. You spend too much time alone. It's not healthy. Sometimes she called Claire intense. Sometimes she said withdrawn. Once in a moment of irritation during a family dinner, she said, "You isolate yourself so much you come across almost autistic." Claire didn't respond, but she remembered. Her world was a quiet one of shadows and angles and shutter speeds. And while her classmates were gearing up for AP chemistry or working toward Ivy League dreams, Claire was building a portfolio. She didn't tell anyone about the local contest she entered, a statewide photography competition for high schoolers. She spent a week on the winning photo, a candid shot of an elderly woman feeding birds on a cold morning, the light catching on her fingertips, as if time itself was pausing for her. When the results came back, Claire could hardly believe it. Her photograph had placed first. Not only that, it was featured in the Boston Globe's Youth Arts section with a caption, "Local teen captures humanity in stillness." She clipped the article and brought it home, heart racing. She found Evelyn in the kitchen. Mom, Claire said, holding out the page, unable to hide her grin. "Look, they published my photo." Evelyn glanced down, lips pursing. "Oh, that's nice." Then, without a pause, she added, "Did I tell you Melissa gave a keynote at the Women in Medicine conference? She got a standing ovation." Claire nodded. The glow inside her dimmed, but she didn't let it go out. Not this time. Later that week, her art teacher, Ms. Reynolds, pulled her aside. "You have an eye, Claire," she said, handing back another assignment. "You don't just take pictures, you tell stories without words. That's rare. Don't let anyone convince you this doesn't matter." It was the first time an adult had said that out loud. Claire clung to it like a lifeline. By her senior year, Claire was living two lives. By day, she worked part-time at a marketing agency, filing papers and learning how to edit photos digitally. Her parents called it a responsible step toward real employment. By night, she roamed the city with her Canon, experimenting with long exposures, capturing silhouettes of train stations and empty alleyways. She started submitting her work to independent art zines and small photography shows. A few responded. Her name, tiny in italics, began to appear in footnotes and credits. She didn't tell her parents about those either. They believed she was saving for college, maybe business school. In truth, she was saving for a better lens. It was 2003. Analog photography was fading fast, but Claire loved the patience it required. The weight of the camera, the wait for results. She felt grounded in it, and in a world where she never quite fit, that grounding mattered. Her friends thought she was lucky to have such a powerful family behind her. What they didn't see was how that power left little room for anything that didn't shine the way Melissa did. One afternoon, Claire walked into her room and found Evelyn looking through her portfolio. She had never seen her mother go through her work before. "I didn't know you had this many photos," Evelyn said, flipping through the pages. "Some of them are... okay." Claire held her breath. "But you need to think about your future," Evelyn continued, closing the book. "This won't pay the bills. Why not apply for internships with Melissa's hospital? Something practical." Claire didn't argue. She just took the portfolio back carefully and placed it on the shelf. That night, she went into the darkroom and developed a new print. A self-portrait taken in the window reflection of a storefront, just her alone, surrounded by blur and motion. Out of focus, almost lost, but still there. And as the image came into view under the red light, Claire whispered to herself, "Someday this will matter, even if only to me." For Claire, photography had always been a way of watching other people's lives unfold. Frozen laughter, lingering touches, fathers walking daughters down aisles. But she never expected that in the middle of her work, she might capture something meant for herself. It happened on a late summer afternoon at a wedding staged in the rolling fields outside of Boston. The style was rustic chic, the kind Claire adored photographing. Long wooden tables draped in burlap tablecloths, stretched beneath strands of lanterns strung from tree to tree. Guests nibbled on towers of cupcakes instead of traditional cake, while a live band played country songs that drifted warmly through the air. The whole event glowed with authenticity, a perfect canvas for Claire's lens. She moved among the guests, quiet and unobtrusive, catching the moments that others overlooked: the flower girl stealing frosting with her finger, the groom's mother wiping tears before anyone noticed. And then her viewfinder landed on him. He wasn't part of the bridal party exactly, just a guest, though he stood out. He had the kind of smile that made people's shoulders relax. Claire noticed him first when he crouched down to tie a little boy's shoe, ruffling the child's hair with easy affection. Later, he held back a chair for an elderly woman and made her laugh until her eyes twinkled. During the reception, he gathered a group of restless children and kept them entertained with card tricks while their parents danced. Claire found herself lifting her camera again and again, capturing his warmth almost unconsciously. When she finally lowered it, she realized she was staring. Their first conversation was simple. He approached as she packed away a lens, leaning lightly against the table. "You're the one who sees everything," he said, nodding toward the camera bag. "That's my job," she replied, a little flustered, "to notice what others might miss." "Well, I noticed you," he said with that same open smile before extending his hand. "Ben Carter, 4th grade teacher, and I swear my students would love the way you catch their expressions." The conversation tumbled easily from there. Ben spoke about teaching with the kind of passion Claire rarely heard in adults. He told her about the boy who struggled with math but excelled at drawing comics, and how important it was to recognize talents that didn't fit a mold. Claire listened, struck by the way his words mirrored her own unspoken frustrations with her family. He didn't dismiss creativity as frivolous. He respected it as deeply as she did. When Ben asked for her number, Claire hesitated only a moment before giving it. Something about him felt steady, real. Weeks later, she decided to bring him home for dinner, though her stomach tightened with dread. She knew what Richard and Evelyn valued, and she feared their judgment. Still, she wanted to believe they could see what she saw. They gathered at the long dining table in the family's suburban mansion, the polished mahogany shining under chandelier light. Melissa was there too, glowing in her white coat after a long day at the hospital, her boyfriend now a surgical resident at her side. Ben greeted everyone politely, his warmth undimmed even in the formal setting. But Richard cut to the heart of it with a single question. "Teaching, is it? And what does a 4th grade teacher make these days? Planning to move into finance eventually?" Ben chuckled softly, not insulted, only honest. "I love what I do. I don't measure it in salary. Kids matter more than paychecks." Richard's lips pressed thin. Evelyn quickly filled the silence. Melissa's boyfriend just received an offer at Mass General. Such stability for a young couple. Her tone carried no malice, just a practiced habit of comparison that made Claire's stomach twist. Throughout the meal, Evelyn asked Melissa about her latest surgical case, Richard quizzed the resident about career prospects, and Ben's stories about his classroom barely registered. Claire tried to bridge the gap, but the unspoken hierarchy was suffocating. Finally, Ben reached under the table and took her hand. His grip was warm, reassuring. Yet, when Claire looked at his eyes, she caught something she had never seen there before: a flicker of disappointment. Not in her, but in the way her family had reduced him to a paycheck. She wanted to disappear. For the first time, instead of feeling only invisible, she felt ashamed. Ashamed of the way her family's arrogance cast shadows over her life, and now over someone she cared about. The evening ended politely enough. Ben shook hands with Richard and Evelyn, thanking them for dinner. Melissa offered a perfunctory smile, already checking her phone for messages. When they reached the car, Claire could barely meet his gaze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Ben squeezed her hand gently. "You don't need to apologize for them." Still, as she sat beside him on the drive home, her thoughts churned. Could she truly build a life with a man her parents would never respect? Would their disapproval hang over every milestone, every holiday, every future child, every success dismissed with comparisons to Melissa's perfect path? That night, as she developed photos from the rustic chic wedding lanterns glowing on glossy prints, she replayed the image of Ben laughing with children, his joy untainted by judgment. She wanted to believe that was the truth she could cling to. Yet, in the quiet of her apartment, Claire could not silence the question rising in her heart. What if love was not enough to protect them from the shadow of her family? And for the first time, she wondered whether she was strong enough to choose love over the approval she had chased all her life. The proposal was simple, unadorned, and perfect. Ben had asked Claire on an early autumn morning, kneeling in the grass by the old maple tree in his backyard, a modest ring glinting in the pale sun. She had said yes with tears in her eyes, knowing that love, real love, rarely came wrapped in extravagance. It came in kindness and trust in the hand that held hers through disappointment. From the start, both agreed their wedding would mirror that same authenticity. They didn't want grandeur. They wanted intimacy. So the planning began. The ceremony would be in Ben's backyard, a stretch of grass bordered by wildflowers that Claire adored. Tables would be made from reclaimed wood set beneath strands of lights draped from tree to tree. They imagined chalkboard signs hand-lettered by a friend with words like, "Welcome to our wedding." Claire saw burlap runners, mason jars filled with daisies, a cake baked by Ben's sister. Every detail was small, personal, meaningful. For the first time in years, Claire dared to believe that her parents might surprise her. Perhaps seeing her so happy, so certain would soften them. When she picked up the phone to call Evelyn, she rehearsed her words, steadying her voice against the possibility of indifference. "Mom," she began when Evelyn answered, her tone careful but hopeful. Ben proposed. "We're getting married next June in the backyard. It will be small but beautiful. I really want you and Dad to be there." There was silence, then the clipped sound of Evelyn's sigh. "June, you said I hope it doesn't overlap with the hospital gala. That's one of our busiest months, and your father may have a conference." Claire swallowed, forcing brightness into her voice. "I'll send the invitations soon. It would mean a lot to me if you came." "Yes, send the details," Evelyn replied vaguely, already distracted. "We'll see what we can do." When the call ended, Claire sat with the phone in her hand, her pulse quickening. She had told herself not to expect too much, but some part of her still longed for joy in her mother's voice, even the smallest echo of pride. Instead, she had received polite indifference, a subtle dismissal, masked as practicality. Determined not to give up, she poured her energy into creating the invitations. On cream-colored cardstock, she glued pressed wildflowers, each one unique. She wrote every name by hand, her cursive looping with care. In her parents' envelope, she slipped a note. "I truly want you there. This is the most important day of my life." She sealed it with trembling hands as though sealing away her hope. Weeks turned to months. Claire checked the mailbox daily, then her email inbox. She told herself that her parents were busy, that the silence was not intentional. But each day the emptiness grew heavier. Instead of an RSVP or a phone call, her inbox filled with client inquiries, editing deadlines, requests for her calendar. She smiled for her brides and grooms, capturing their stories while her own felt painfully unfinished. 2 months after the invitations had gone out, she realized she had received no acknowledgement at all. Not even Melissa had written. The absence was louder than words. It was not just that they might not come, it was that they had not even bothered to decline. They had erased her wedding from their priorities as if it didn't exist. Claire tried to distract herself with planning. She chose the flowers, arranged the seating, practiced her vows with Ben late at night. He would catch her staring at her phone, her expression tight, and gently remind her, "The people who matter will be there. The rest, maybe never would have been there in spirit anyway." She nodded, but deep down, the sting remained. The evening before she finalized the guest list, Claire sat by the window scrolling through her emails again. A reminder for a photography deadline, a thank you note from a bride, a promotion ad from a camera store. Nothing from Richard or Evelyn, nothing from Melissa. She stared at the blank spaces, her chest tight. For so many years she had accepted being secondary and visible. But now, on the verge of beginning her own family, she felt the ache more deeply than ever. Wasn't this the moment when a parent should stand closest when a daughter deserved to feel chosen? Claire set the phone down and whispered into the stillness of her apartment. "They can't take this from me." She repeated it like a vow, a quiet defiance against the silence that had shaped her childhood. She knew the absence of their approval would hurt. It already did. But she also knew her wedding. Their wedding would not be defined by who failed to show up. It would be defined by the love she and Ben built, by the friends who believed in them, by the family they were creating from scratch. Still, as she folded another stack of hand-painted place cards and tucked them neatly into a box, the thought pressed against her heart. Even on the most important day of her life, she was once again the daughter not worth making time for. And though she promised herself she would not let it ruin her joy, she could not help but feel the shadow linger. The silence from her parents had stretched too long. Weeks of unanswered invitations, unanswered notes, unanswered hope. Claire told herself she was done waiting, but her heart refused to let go of the tiniest thread of faith. She needed to hear it from them directly, even if it hurt. So one gray Saturday morning, she drove back to the house she had grown up in, the Grand Colonial on a manicured street in the suburbs, carrying with her a final attempt to bridge the gap. She clutched a crisp wedding invitation in one hand, and in the other a photograph she had taken of Ben at the engagement party, a candid shot of him laughing with her cousin's children, his kindness radiating so clearly it barely needed explanation. She thought maybe if they saw him through her eyes, they might understand. The house smelled the same as always, lemon polish on the wood, faint perfume from Evelyn's roses arranged on the side table. Claire stepped into the living room where her parents sat together, Evelyn perched with elegance on the sofa. Richard settled in his leather chair. She hesitated only a moment before offering the envelope. "I came to give you this in person," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The wedding is in June. Please, I really want you there." Richard accepted the envelope but didn't open it. He cleared his throat. "That weekend won't work. Melissa and the children will be visiting. We've already made plans." Claire's chest tightened. "It's my wedding day," she said carefully. "Can't they come another time? Just this once." Evelyn's gaze was cool, almost detached. "Melissa has responsibilities. The children's schedules are full. You know how it is. We can't rearrange everything for this." Desperation crept into her tone. "But this isn't just anything. It's my wedding." Evelyn set down her teacup with precision and cut her off. "With where you are in life, dear, a backyard ceremony isn't exactly worth our time." The words sliced through the air sharper than any blade. Claire's breath caught as her mother continued, her tone polished but merciless. "You've chosen a path with little to show for it. Photography, a modest living, marrying a schoolteacher. We don't mean to be cruel, but this is not the kind of event that defines our family. A waste of time for someone like you." Richard echoed it, the phrase so casual, so final, that Claire felt her heart collapse inside her chest. She opened her mouth to argue, to shout, to beg, but no sound came. Instead, her eyes fell on her phone, where a message from Melissa still lingered unread from weeks earlier. "Congratulations on your engagement." It read polite but detached. No mention of attending, no excitement, just the bare minimum required. A sister's acknowledgement that felt like a stranger's obligation. Claire looked back at her parents, her throat burning. "I thought just once you might want to be there. Not for the size of the venue or who I'm marrying, but for me." Richard shifted in his chair. "We've said our piece." The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Evelyn reached for her cup again, as if the matter had already been cleared from her schedule. Claire stood slowly, gripping the photo of Ben so tightly the edges curled. She had brought it to remind them of his worth, of her worth. Instead, she slid it back into her bag, her chest hollow. She turned without another word, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood as she walked through the foyer. No one followed. No one called after her. The heavy front door closed with a dull thud behind her. In the driver's seat of her car, she finally let the tears come. They blurred the quiet suburban street before her, streaking her vision until she could barely see. But beneath the grief, beneath the sting of rejection, something else stirred. A spark of resolve. If they saw her as unworthy as trivial, then she would stop asking them to see her at all. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, whispering to herself, "This is the last time I beg." As the engine started, she felt the tiniest shift inside her. Not freedom, not yet, but the fragile beginning of it. She would marry Ben without them. She would celebrate with those who valued her presence, not her status. She would build her own happiness, even if her family refused to recognize it. The drive back to the city was long, the road stretching ahead in silver ribbons of rain. Claire wiped her eyes and focused on the horizon, whispering through the ache in her chest, "I will not let them take this from me. Not anymore." And for the first time, the idea of cutting the cord, truly severing it, no longer terrified her. It felt like survival. It felt like the only way forward. The wedding day came like a quiet miracle. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wildflowers that lined the backyard. Claire had worried for months that the absence of her parents would overshadow the ceremony, but as she stood in her lace dress, the sun filtering through the trees, she felt held by the people who had chosen to be there. Her Aunt Karen straightened her veil with gentle hands, and her Uncle Jack, steady and warm, offered his arm to walk her down the aisle. When the music began and the small crowd rose, Claire felt her throat tighten. The faces before her weren't the ones she had once begged for, but they were radiant with love. Friends from her photography circle, Ben's colleagues from school, cousins who had driven for hours, all stood applauding, their eyes wet, their smiles genuine. As she reached the altar, Ben's eyes met hers, brimming with the kind of pride she had never once seen in her parents. The vows were simple, personal. Claire spoke of finding light in unlikely places of learning, that family was not always defined by blood. Ben promised to be her partner, to treasure her vision, to laugh with her through the shadows. When the officiant pronounced them, husband and wife cheers erupted, filling the garden with joy that seemed to wrap around her like sunlight. For a few fleeting hours, she allowed herself to believe this was enough. That night, in the quiet of their small hotel room, she curled against Ben, exhaustion and happiness mingling. He had drifted into sleep, his arm draped protectively over her when she reached for her phone almost without thinking. The habit was old and instinctive, checking messages, searching for some sign that her family had remembered. She opened Facebook, and there it was. The screen lit with photos posted by Evelyn, a wide Hawaiian beach, golden sand stretching endlessly beneath a turquoise sky, Richard in khaki shorts and sunglasses raising a glass, Melissa with her children, their laughter frozen mid-motion as waves splashed their ankles. Evelyn herself smiling broadly beside them, her caption carefully chosen, "Perfect vacation with the people who matter most." Claire's heart stopped. The words seared into her chest, crueler than silence. The people who matter most. She scrolled further, her fingers trembling. More photos, a tour of a pineapple plantation, a family dinner overlooking the ocean, cocktails at sunset. The timestamp on the first image made her stomach twist. It had been posted the day before her wedding. She checked the earlier posts, her pulse hammering. The flights, the hotel check-in, all arranged weeks ago, long before her invitations had been sent. They had never intended to come, not for a moment. Her breath caught and tears blurred her vision. She pressed the phone to her chest, muffling the sob that rose in her throat. She wanted to scream, to shatter the silence that filled the room. Instead, she lay back against Ben, shaking as grief tore through her. He stirred, half awake, sensing her trembling. "Claire." His voice was thick with sleep, but when he saw her face, he sat up quickly. "What happened?" Wordlessly, she showed him the phone. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through the images, the smile fading from his face. After a long silence, he set it down on the nightstand and pulled her into his arms. They chose that he said softly, his voice steady, even as hers broke. "But look around you. The people who matter were with us today. That's your real family. That's what counts." Claire buried her face against his chest. tears soaking into his shirt. His words soothed, but the wound was deep. She had thought rejection couldn't hurt more than being told her wedding was a waste. But seeing the alternative so clearly, the deliberate choice of a Hawaiian beach over her vows, made the pain unbearable. She cried until exhaustion overtook her, lulled only by the steady rhythm of Ben's heartbeat. In the morning, she reached for her phone again, but this time she didn't open the app. Instead, she held down the power button until the screen went black. She placed it face down on the table, a quiet act of defiance against the cruelty that technology had carried into her wedding night. "I won't let them take this from me," she whispered, her voice raw but certain. She turned to Ben, who was tying his shoes, preparing for the quiet day they had planned together. He smiled at her, gentle and grounding. And for the first time since the photos had burned into her memory, she let herself smile back. The wound remained sharp and aching, but she knew she could not dwell in it. Their future would not be built on the absence of those who had chosen the ocean over her. It would be built on the laughter and love that had filled the garden, on the vows whispered under the trees, on the steady hand of the man beside her. Still, as she slipped her dress into the garment bag and prepared to leave the room, she knew the scar would always remain. Because beneath the joy of the day lingered one cruel truth: her parents had never even considered being part of it. And no matter how much she tried to push forward, that reality would always sting. The salt air of Cape Cod was crisp that morning, carrying the cry of gulls across the shoreline. Claire lifted her camera, adjusting the focus as the first streaks of sunlight broke across the horizon. The ocean shimmered, gold waves curling softly against the sand, and for a moment she felt peace. After everything, the absence of her parents, the cruel revelation of Hawaii, she had found herself here with Ben, beginning their marriage with quiet beauty. They had chosen Cape Cod precisely for its simplicity. No exotic islands, no lavish resorts, just a small inn near the water where mornings were filled with long walks on the beach, and evenings ended with clam chowder at seaside cafes. Claire photographed everything: Ben's laughter, as the wind tangled his hair, the shells scattered like jewels across the tide line, the way the world felt softer with him by her side. She was reviewing a photo of the sunrise when her phone buzzed sharply. The sound jarred against the calm of the morning. She almost ignored it, thinking it was another friend posting congratulations. But when she glanced at the screen, her breath caught. Richard. For a heartbeat, she considered letting it ring. But habit, the old unbroken reflex of a daughter desperate for acknowledgement, made her swipe to answer. Claire Richards' voice was taut, urgent. "Finally. I've been trying to reach you. We have a serious problem." Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" "It's the Madison property loan," he said, words tumbling fast. "The bank has sent notices. They're threatening foreclosure. We can't let this happen." Claire froze, the ocean's rhythm forgotten. The Madison loan. 3 years earlier, her father had asked her to co-sign. She had been hesitant, but Richard had looked her in the eye for once, including her in something important. "This will show me you're responsible," he had said. "Do this, and I'll finally be proud." The chance to earn that elusive approval had been too tempting. She had signed, ignoring the small voice of caution. Now the memory burned. "I thought you said you'd handle everything," she said slowly. "I was handling it," Richard replied sharply. "But there were unexpected expenses. The management company hasn't filled the vacancies, and the reserve fund is drained. We've missed payments. The bank wants action immediately." Claire's stomach churned. "How much?" 40,000, he said flatly. "We need it to bring the account current with penalties. You need to transfer it right away. Otherwise, your credit will suffer too. Family helps family, Claire. You understand that." She gripped the phone tighter, her throat dry. The timing struck her like a cruel joke. Just days after choosing Hawaii over her wedding, they were calling not to apologize, not to acknowledge her vows, but to demand money. $40,000, she repeated. "You're successful now," Richard pressed. "You can manage it. Think of it as protecting yourself as well as us. We can't let this stain your record. It's in your name, too." Her voice trembled, though, with anger more than fear. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "There was no need to worry you," he snapped. "I thought I could fix it myself. But now you must step up. You're part of this family, and families help one another." The words landed like stones, bitter in their hypocrisy. Where was family when she walked down the aisle without them? Where was family when Evelyn posted about the people who matter most from a beach thousands of miles away? They had chosen absence, yet now expected her presence in their crisis. She inhaled slowly, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. For so long her parents had dictated the terms of her worth. But here, with the sea stretching endlessly before her, she felt something shift. "I need time to think," she said, her tone firm. "There is no time," Richard insisted, his voice rising. "The bank will act. This is serious. You can't play games with this." Her chest tightened, but for once she did not fold. She steadied her breath, gripped the phone, and said, "I'll call you back." Before he could respond, she ended the call. The screen went dark in her hand. For the first time in her life, she had hung up first. The silence that followed was deafening, yet oddly liberating. She stood there on the sand, the waves whispering against the shore, her heart racing with both fear and relief. Ben approached carrying 2 cups of coffee, his smile fading when he saw her face. "What happened?" She told him everything: the loan, the missed payments, the demand for money. His brow furrowed, but his hand was steady as it reached for hers. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "But promise me one thing. Don't just give in because he says you must. Find out the truth first. Make sure you know what's really happening." Claire nodded, her chest still tight. The ocean glimmered before her, beautiful and endless, but behind her loomed the shadow of her family's choices. For the first time, though, she felt the stirrings of control. She had ended the call. She had the power to decide. As the tide rose against the sand, Claire whispered to herself, "Not this time." The call from Richard had lingered in Claire's mind like a storm cloud. Even as she walked the sandy beaches of Cape Cod with Ben, trying to soak in the quiet joy of their honeymoon, her thoughts returned to the $40,000 her father had demanded. The number rang in her head like a siren. 40,000 wasn't just money. It was months of hard work, the savings she had carefully built for her photography studio, the security she had carved out on her own. She couldn't simply hand it over. Not without answers. Back in Boston a week later, Claire wasted no time. She scheduled an appointment with a lawyer recommended by one of her photography clients, a sharp woman named Margaret, who specialized in real estate and financial disputes. Claire sat in the polished oak office, her fingers twisting in her lap as Margaret reviewed the Madison property documents. "You're listed as co-signer," Margaret explained, adjusting her glasses. "That gives you legal responsibility if payments are missed. According to these records, 5 payments have been missed in a row, not 3 as your father claimed." Claire's stomach dropped. 5? Margaret nodded grimly. "Yes. And the first missed payment was almost 6 months ago." 6 months. Claire's mind raced. That would have been around the time her parents were finalizing their trip to Hawaii. She pressed her lips together, anger beginning to eclipse fear. "And the reserve fund?" she asked. "Depleted," Margaret said. "Every cent drained. Airline charges, luxury hotels, private tours. It seems your father redirected funds toward personal expenses." She set the papers down, her expression firm. "I won't mince words. This wasn't poor luck. This was mismanagement, and it has placed you in serious jeopardy." The next day, Claire met with a financial advisor, hoping for a clearer picture. The advisor confirmed what Margaret had revealed. Her credit score had already dropped by nearly 100 points. If the loan defaulted, it could ruin her chances of expanding her studio, securing favorable loans, even something as simple as refinancing her condo. "You can protect yourself," the advisor told her gently. "But it requires acting now. Either you bring the loan current, or you negotiate with the bank to separate your liability. Both will be difficult. Both will have consequences." Claire nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She was remembering all the times she had begged for acknowledgement from her parents. The high school art show where her photograph had won first prize brushed aside because Melissa had received a science scholarship. The college graduation she had attended alone while her parents celebrated Melissa's medical residency. The wedding invitation she had hand-painted ignored while they boarded a flight to Hawaii. Every memory pressed against her chest until she could barely breathe. The pattern was clear. They reached out only when they needed something from applause from appearances from her bank account. They had never been there for her in return. That evening she sat at her kitchen table with Ben's financial statements spread before them. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. The payments had stopped the very month her parents booked their Hawaiian vacation. They had chosen Mai Tais and oceanfront suites over responsibility over her future. Ben reached across the table, his hand steady on hers. "You know what this means." Claire's eyes filled, though not with tears this time, with anger, with clarity. "It means I can't save them. Not anymore." She picked up the phone and dialed Margaret. When the lawyer answered, Claire's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "I've made my decision," Claire said. "I will not pay the $40,000. I will not cover their mistake. Whatever happens, I'll handle it myself." Margaret hesitated. "Are you certain it could damage your credit for years?" Claire exhaled slowly. "I'm certain. I've spent my whole life rescuing them with silence, with obedience, with sacrifice. This time I won't. I won't save them anymore. Not once more." When she hung up, she felt her body trembling. But beneath the tremors was something else, a sense of release like shackles snapping loose. For the first time, she had chosen herself over their approval. That night, as she lay in bed beside Ben, the city lights casting faint shadows across their room, she whispered into the darkness, "I'm done." The words scared her. They also freed her. She didn't know how bad the consequences might be, how deep the damage to her credit would run, how ugly her father's anger might become. But she knew one thing with certainty: she would not let them use her again. She closed her eyes and repeated it like a vow. No more. And though fear lingered at the edges of her resolve, there was light too. A fragile, defiant light that whispered of survival, of strength, of a life no longer built on begging for scraps of recognition. She would face the storm. But this time she would face it on her own terms. Claire had delayed the call for 2 days, though the weight of it pressed constantly on her chest. She knew her father would not let her silence stand. Richard always expected the final word, the final authority. But this time Claire had resolved it would not be his. She sat at her desk in the small studio, her laptop open, but forgotten her phone clutched in her hand. Outside, Boston's streets buzzed faintly with late afternoon traffic. Inside, her pulse thundered in her ears as she pressed the call button. Richard answered on the first ring. Finally, he barked. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your mind. Have you arranged the transfer?" Claire inhaled, steadying her voice. "No, I haven't." A beat of silence. Then sharper. "What do you mean, no? Do you understand what's at stake? Your credit, your future." "Don't call me about trivial matters." Claire interrupted the words, leaving her lips like steel. It was Evelyn's phrase, the one she had used to dismiss Claire's wedding. Now Claire hurled it back. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Then Richard exploded. "How dare you? Don't you take that tone with me. After everything I've done for this family, you, my own daughter, refuse to help. You are ungrateful, selfish, disloyal. You'll regret this. You'll regret turning your back on your own blood." Claire's grip tightened, but her voice remained calm. "I learned this from you, Dad. From both of you. You taught me how to treat people you don't find important." Richard scoffed. "That's nonsense." "Is it?" Claire's tone sharpened. "My wedding was a waste of time for someone like me. My career has always been a hobby. Every accomplishment of mine dismissed, every effort ignored unless it benefited you. And now suddenly I'm supposed to sacrifice everything to save your mistake." His breathing was audible through the line, heavy with anger. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. If you don't help, you'll sink too." "I'll handle my own consequences," Claire replied firmly. "But I will not cover yours." Richard's voice rose sharp with fury. "You are being reckless. You think this independence makes you strong. It makes you foolish. When the bank ruins your reputation, when you can't get another loan, you'll come crawling back. Mark my words." For a moment, Claire closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. The old Claire might have crumbled beneath them, desperate to prove him wrong, desperate to earn back favor. But the woman sitting here now, the wife, the artist, the survivor, she did not flinch. "I won't crawl back," she said, her voice steady. "Not this time. Not ever." Richard tried again, his tone shifting, almost coaxing. "Claire, listen. We can fix this together. Family doesn't abandon family. Think about how it will look if people find out. Do you want to be the daughter who let her own father fail?" She almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You already abandoned me. On the most important day of my life. You chose Hawaii over me, and then you dared to call it priorities. Don't lecture me about family." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that settled in when truths could no longer be ignored. Finally, Claire took a breath and delivered the words she had rehearsed in her mind for nights. "I'm done, Dad. I won't answer your calls again. I won't be your safety net. From now on, I protect myself." Before he could respond, she ended the call. Her thumb pressed the button firmly, decisively. She didn't tremble, not this time. For a long moment she stared at the phone lying in her palm. Then with deliberate care she scrolled to Richard's contact and pressed delete. Evelyn's number followed. Melissa's too. One by one the lifelines to her family vanished, leaving only a quiet final void. The tears came afterward, hot and unbidden, spilling down her cheeks as the gravity of what she had done settled in. She had severed the cord, the bond she had clung to despite its cruelty. It hurt. It hurt in places she hadn't even known could ache. But beneath the pain was something else. A strange, raw strength. Ben found her there, phone still in her hand, eyes red but unbroken. He knelt beside her, resting his forehead against hers. "You okay?" he whispered. Claire let out a shaky breath. Not okay, but lighter. Like I've finally stepped out of a shadow that's been over me my whole life. And as she leaned into him, she knew it was true. The shadow had been cast by the people who should have loved her most. By cutting them out, she hadn't lost family, she had lost the illusion of it. And in its place, she had found herself. The silence that followed Claire's final call with Richard did not last long. Within days, whispers began to circulate, carried not just through family, but through the polished corridors of Boston's social scene. It started with Evelyn, who had never tolerated losing control of a narrative. If Claire would not bend, Evelyn would make sure others believed the fault was hers. The first report came from a colleague at the hospital. At a fundraising gala, Evelyn had spoken in hushed but pointed tones, explaining that her younger daughter had turned her back on the family during a difficult financial setback. Claire, she said, was too self-absorbed, too obsessed with her little photography business to care about her father's sacrifices. By the time dessert was served, Evelyn had painted a picture of a selfish daughter married to a well-meaning but useless schoolteacher. Heads had nodded sympathetically. Some had clucked their tongues in pity for Richard and Evelyn, imagining them burdened with such an ungrateful child. The next came from within the family itself. Claire's phone lit up with numbers she hadn't seen in years, cousins, uncles, even her grandmother. Each call carried the same script, the same accusations. "Your parents did everything for you, and this is how you repay them," one aunt scolded. Another sighed. "Melissa still found the decency to send you a wedding gift, even though she's so busy saving lives. Can't you show the same grace?" Claire listened, sometimes responding, sometimes hanging up mid-sentence when the words became too cruel. What struck her most was how easily they believed the story her parents spun. None of them asked why she had refused to help. None asked what she had endured. They accepted Evelyn's version as gospel. Then came Melissa. Her sister's voice, cool and precise, reached her one evening while Claire sat editing wedding photos in her studio. "I heard what you did," Melissa began without greeting. "Dad is devastated. Mom can barely sleep. And you sit there acting like you've been wronged, Claire. If you're jealous of me, just say it. But don't punish our parents for it. They don't deserve this." Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to pour out the years of neglect, to thrust the truth into Melissa's face. But something in Melissa's words stopped her. Jealousy. That was the narrative Evelyn and Richard had fed her sister too. Melissa genuinely believed Claire's refusal was rooted in envy, not betrayal. "You don't know the whole story," Claire said quietly. Melissa laughed bitterly. "The whole story I know enough. You've always been dramatic, Claire. Always desperate for attention, but abandoning Dad when he needed you most. That's not drama. That's cruelty." The call ended with Melissa's voice sharp as glass. "One day you'll regret this, and by then it'll be too late." Claire sat in the stillness of her studio, anger and grief warring in her chest. She opened her laptop, her fingers trembling but purposeful. If they wanted stories, she would give them facts. She dug through the bank records Margaret had obtained. Each line told the truth. Evelyn had omitted the exact dates Richard had stopped paying the loan, the airline tickets to Hawaii purchased within days of those missed payments, the hotel invoices for beachfront suites. And alongside them, screenshots from Evelyn's social media posts, smiling on the beach captioned with "the people who matter most," all while Claire had been walking down an aisle alone. That night, she composed an email. She did not plead, did not beg. She simply laid out the evidence in stark, undeniable order. The subject line read, "The truth about Madison and Hawaii." Her message was concise. She explained the timeline, attached the documents, and ended with a single line: "Decide for yourself who abandoned whom." She sent it to every relative who had called to chastise her and to Melissa as well. The responses trickled in slowly. Some ignored it altogether, unwilling to confront the possibility that their image of Richard and Evelyn might be flawed. But others hesitated. One cousin replied with a single word, "Wow." An uncle responded, "This changes things." Even Claire's grandmother, usually silent, left a voicemail late one night, her voice wavering. "I didn't know, Claire. I wish I had. I'm sorry." Melissa, however, said nothing. No reply, no acknowledgement. The silence from her sister was deafening, louder than any insult. Claire realized then that Melissa might never allow herself to see the truth. To do so would shatter the foundation she had built her life upon, the pedestal her parents had placed her on since childhood. Claire sat at her desk after midnight, the glow of the screen fading, her heart still heavy but steadier. For the first time, she felt the narrative shifting. Not fully, not decisively, but enough to pierce the perfect facade her parents had constructed. The battle of public opinion had begun. And though Evelyn might still whisper at galas, though Richard might still thunder with accusations, Claire knew she had struck her own blow. She had spoken the truth, and some had heard it. That was enough for now. As she powered down her laptop, she whispered to herself, "They don't get to write my story anymore." In the days after sending her email, Claire braced herself for silence. She expected rejection, expected more harsh words from relatives too invested in her parents' narrative to see beyond it. Yet unexpectedly, a few calls came, not with anger, but with quiet support. Her Aunt Karen was the first. The voice on the line was warm, steady, tinged with indignation on Claire's behalf. "You did the right thing," Karen said firmly. "I've watched your parents elevate Melissa for years while treating you like an afterthought. It always broke my heart. I'm glad you finally said no." Uncle Jack called next. His tone was gentler, more sorrowful than angry. "They'll never admit it, Claire. Not the way you deserve. But you don't have to live your life waiting for scraps of affection. You're better than that. Ben knows it. We know it. That's enough." Even a few cousins reached out, sharing their own small stories of being overlooked, though none had endured the scale of dismissal Claire had. For the first time in years, she felt seen by family, though not by her parents nor by Melissa. These were relatives who had watched quietly from the sidelines, perhaps too polite to speak before, but now willing to stand with her. Still, the wounds were deep. Support eased the sting, but it did not erase decades of invisibility. Claire realized she needed more than whispered reassurances. She needed to heal from the ground up. It was Ben who suggested it one evening as they sat together over takeout containers. "There are groups," he said carefully, "support groups, therapy circles. People who've gone through family estrangement, favoritism, neglect. You wouldn't have to carry it all alone anymore." Claire hesitated. The thought of sitting in a circle telling strangers about her parents felt exposing. But the longer she considered it, the more it made sense. She had spent her whole life being silenced, minimized. Maybe it was time to speak where her words would not be dismissed. So on a chilly Thursday night in Boston, she walked into a modest community center tucked between a coffee shop and a pharmacy. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and folding chairs formed a circle in the middle of the room. A sign on the door read, "Family Estrangement Support Group. You're not alone." She nearly turned around, but then a woman smiled at her, offered her a seat, and asked nothing more than her name. That simple kindness anchored her in place. Over the next hour, Claire listened as others shared stories eerily familiar of parents who favored one child of siblings who carried the weight of expectation while others were cast aside. One man described how his father had skipped his college graduation to attend his brother's soccer tournament. A woman spoke about a mother who had never once said, "I'm proud of you." Each story resonated like an echo in Claire's chest. When it came her turn, her voice trembled, but she found the words. "I invited my parents to my wedding. They said it wasn't worth their time. And then they went to Hawaii with my sister instead." Gasps rippled through the circle, followed by soft murmurs of understanding. No one minimized it. No one told her she was exaggerating. They simply listened. For the first time, Claire's pain wasn't dismissed as drama. It was acknowledged, validated. And that recognition was like air after years of suffocation. Encouraged by the group, Claire took another step. She booked her first session with a therapist. Sitting on the leather chair across from Dr. Harris, she felt awkward, uncertain. But as the session unfolded, she found herself unraveling stories she had kept knotted inside for decades. She spoke of the 6-year-old girl ignored at an awards ceremony, of the young woman dismissed for pursuing art, of the bride abandoned for a family vacation. Each memory cut, but Dr. Harris did not flinch or dismiss. She guided Claire to see the patterns, to understand that these wounds were not her fault. "You've been chasing love where it was never going to be given freely," Dr. Harris said gently. "But love is not earned by achievement or compliance. You've already built a family with Ben, with the people who choose you. That's where your healing begins." Claire left that session lighter than she had entered. It was not a cure, not a sudden erasure of pain. But it was a beginning. One evening, walking home from the support group, she paused at the Charles River, the city lights shimmering on the water. She realized she no longer felt quite so alone. She had people: Ben, Aunt Karen, Uncle Jack, her newfound circle at the support group. And she had herself stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. As she stood there in the crisp night air, she whispered, "I don't need their approval anymore." It was not yet complete freedom. The ache still lived inside her. But for the first time, she believed she could build a life beyond it. Hope had returned, fragile, but real. And with it came the understanding that her story would no longer be written by those who had tried to erase her. It would be written by her own hand, surrounded by those who truly stood beside her. Spring arrived in Boston with a burst of color. Tulips lined the public gardens, street performers filled the air with music, and Claire found herself breathing easier than she had in years. For the first time in her adult life, she was no longer weighed down by the need to earn her parents' approval. The space their absence created was slowly being filled with something new: confidence, purpose, freedom. Her photography business, once dismissed as a mere hobby, blossomed into something larger than she had dared to imagine. Claire opened a second studio, this one designed with a distinctly modern yet whimsical feel. Whitewashed brick walls hanging macrame shelves filled with wildflowers in mason jars, it was the perfect setting for her new specialty, boho chic weddings. Couples adored the relaxed elegance she captured, and soon her calendar was filled more than a year in advance. One morning, while sipping her coffee and reviewing edits, Claire received an email that made her breath catch. The subject line read, "Feature Request, The Knot Magazine." The editor explained that they wanted to showcase her work in their upcoming summer issue, praising her ability to blend authenticity with artistry. Claire sat in stunned silence for several moments, staring at the screen. The Knot was not just any magazine, it was one of the most prestigious wedding publications in the country. Being featured there was a mark of legitimacy, a validation few photographers achieved. When the issue was released, Claire's photos of a sunlit ceremony in a wildflower field spread across 6 glossy pages. Beneath them, the caption read, "Claire Dawson Photography, Capturing Love Without Pretension." She held the magazine in her hands, tracing her name on the page, and for once felt no urge to call her parents. Their recognition no longer mattered. Her worth was now visible to the world, undeniable and independent of their approval. Soon after, Claire received another unexpected invitation to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs in Boston. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking had never been her strength, and the idea of standing before hundreds of strangers unnerved her. But Ben encouraged her gently. "Your story could inspire someone who feels invisible the way you once did. Isn't that worth it?" So Claire agreed. On the day of the conference, she stood backstage in a tailored navy dress, clutching her note cards with clammy hands. The hum of the crowd filtered through the curtain, reminding her of the cocktail parties her parents used to host, rooms filled with judgment and silent comparisons. But this was different. These people weren't here to scrutinize. They were here to learn. When her name was called, Claire walked onto the stage. The spotlight warmed her face, and the applause that greeted her was immediate, genuine. She began with a trembling voice, recounting how she had once believed she was insignificant, always overshadowed by a sister who could do no wrong. She spoke of parents who had measured worth in titles and salaries, who had told her that photography was a waste of time. But as she continued, her voice grew stronger. She described the wedding day her parents had called trivial, the Hawaii trip that revealed their true priorities, and the moment she decided to stop chasing their approval. "I spent years believing I was not enough," she told the audience, "until I realized I didn't need anyone else to tell me my value. I had the power to define it for myself." When the moderator asked her how she had managed to stay resilient through rejection and betrayal, Claire did not hesitate. She looked directly at the audience and said, "I used to be the daughter who wasn't important enough. Now I'm the woman who creates her own importance. That shift is everything." The room erupted in applause. Women stood clapping, nodding, some with tears in their eyes. In their faces, Claire saw reflections of herself, women who had been doubted, dismissed, underestimated. For the first time, she felt not only free from her family's shadow, but empowered by the possibility that her story could help others step out of their own. Afterward, attendees crowded around her, thanking her for her honesty. One young business owner said, "I was ready to give up. Hearing you made me believe I can keep going." Claire smiled, humbled. Her pain had been real, but so was the strength it had given her. That night back at home, Claire curled into Ben's arms on their worn but beloved couch. The magazine lay on the coffee table, her face on the conference program tucked beside it. She pressed her cheek against Ben's shoulder and whispered, "For the first time, I feel truly free." Ben kissed the top of her head. "That's because you are." As she drifted toward sleep, Claire realized she no longer measured her life by the approval she lacked. Instead, she measured it by the love she had built, the work she had created, the future she was shaping. Freedom was not the absence of her family's judgment. It was the presence of her own belief in herself. December swept into Boston with the scent of pine and the chill of snow-dusted streets. Shop windows glowed with twinkling lights, and the air buzzed with the anticipation of Christmas. For Claire, it was a season that had always carried a sting. Growing up, the holidays in her parents' home had been polished affairs with catered dinners and carefully curated decorations, but never warmth. Presents were measured in expense, not sentiment, and affection was as rare as snow in July. This year felt different. Claire was looking forward to celebrating Christmas with Ben's family, who had already made her feel like one of their own. They baked gingerbread cookies together, laughing when the shapes came out crooked. They carried home a freshly cut pine tree, decorating it with mismatched ornaments, each carrying a story. Ben's childhood drawings, his parents' wedding keepsakes, a delicate glass angel gifted by a neighbor long ago. Claire added one of her own photographs, framed and hung carefully among the branches. It was messy, imperfect, and filled with love. Then one afternoon, as she sat editing wedding albums at her studio, her inbox pinged. The sender's name made her stomach twist: Evelyn Dawson. She clicked hesitantly, her pulse quickening. The email was brief. Claire, we were wondering if you might join us for Christmas this year. We'd like to see you. Love, Mom. Claire stared at the words, reading them again and again. Her mother had never initiated contact like this, not in such simple, almost humble terms. No mention of Melissa, no excuses about gala events, no superiority. Just an invitation. Yet Claire's heart tightened. She had been down this road before, hope dangled only to be crushed. That evening she showed the message to Ben. He read it silently, then looked at her with steady eyes. "How does it make you feel?" he asked. Claire sighed, her voice low. Confused. Part of me wants to believe she means it. But another part wonders if it's just another performance, another way to save face. I can't afford to let my guard down again. Ben squeezed her hand. You don't owe them your Christmas. You get to choose. Claire typed her reply with care. Thank you for reaching out. This year I'll be spending Christmas with Ben and his family. I wish you both well. She hesitated before hitting send, but when she did, a surprising calm washed over her. For once, she wasn't reacting out of fear or longing, she was making a choice that protected her peace. The next day, Evelyn's response arrived. It was only 2 sentences, but they struck Claire harder than she expected. We understand. We'll wait. Whenever you're ready. Claire blinked, rereading the words. They were not drenched in manipulation or blame. They were hesitant, even vulnerable. For the first time in her life, she saw her mother bend, if only slightly. Still, Claire kept her distance. She threw herself into the joyful chaos of Ben's family celebration. On Christmas Eve, they gathered around the fireplace, trading stories and passing mugs of hot cocoa topped with marshmallows. Claire joined Ben's mother in the kitchen, dusting powdered sugar on freshly baked cookies, the smell filling the house with warmth. Later, they all sang carols off-key around the tree, their laughter blending with the soft glow of the lights. For Claire, it was a revelation. This was what Christmas was meant to feel like, not the rigid perfection of her childhood home, but the messy, loud, wholehearted love of people who showed up for each other. She leaned back against Ben, her eyes shining as she whispered, I never thought I'd have this. You deserve every bit of it, he whispered back. And yet Evelyn's email lingered in Claire's mind. The line, "We will wait," replayed like a refrain. It was small, but it was new. A mother who had once declared her daughter's wedding a waste of time was now, at least in words, willing to wait for her daughter's readiness. On Christmas night, after the festivities had ended and the house had grown quiet, Claire sat by the tree alone, gazing at the mismatched ornaments and glowing lights. She felt a fragile thread of hope tug at her heart, not enough to erase the past, not enough to open the door wide, but enough to remind her that change, however slight, might be possible. Still, she knew her boundaries mattered. She whispered softly, almost like a vow to herself, I can hope. But I will protect myself first. And for the first time during the holidays, Claire felt both joy and strength in equal measure. Spring had given way to summer, and with it came a new chapter for Claire and Ben. The news had arrived one morning with a small stick on the bathroom counter, 2 pink lines that changed everything. Claire was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and fear in equal measure. She pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, whispering a prayer that this child would never feel the loneliness she had once known. Months later, as her belly grew rounder, her friends insisted on hosting a baby shower. The gathering was held in a cozy suburban home just outside Boston, decorated with pastel balloons and a table covered in frosted cupcakes and pink and blue confetti. A banner stretched across the wall reading, "Welcome, Baby Dawson." Guests brought gifts wrapped in soft paper, tiny blankets, rattles, storybooks, and stuffed animals. Claire smiled as she opened each one, though in her heart a quiet storm brewed. She laughed along as games were played and photos snapped, but when she slipped into the kitchen to refill her glass of sparkling water, her hand rested protectively over her stomach. "What if I'm like her?" she whispered to Ben, who had followed her. "Like who?" He asked gently, though he knew the answer. "My mother. Cold, demanding, always seeing flaws instead of love." What if I repeat it without even realizing? Ben reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Claire, people who don't worry about failing are the ones who repeat mistakes. The fact that you're afraid means you're already different. You won't be her." His words settled over her like a blanket, but the fear lingered. That night, unable to sleep, Claire pulled out a notebook. She began to write not for herself, but for the child she carried. Page after page, she poured her thoughts, her memories, her promises. She wrote about how she had grown up feeling invisible, always second to Melissa, and how she swore her baby would never know that ache. She admitted her fears openly, the fear of repeating patterns, of being too harsh, of failing at the most important role of her life. And then she made her vow, the one that steadied her heart, as she set down the pen. "My child," she wrote, "you will never have to earn my love. You will never need to prove you are worthy of affection. From your first breath, you will have all of me, my heart, my protection, my belief in you. That is my promise, and I will keep it every day of my life." As she closed the journal, Claire felt a weight lift. The act of putting her fears and hopes into words gave her a sense of control, a sense that she could shape her story differently than the one she had inherited. She placed the journal on her nightstand, resolving to write in it often a record of love her child could one day read. Weeks passed, and with them came the usual discomforts of pregnancy, sleepless nights, swollen ankles, and moments of exhaustion so heavy she barely recognized herself. Yet beneath it all was a growing strength. Each kick from within reminded her that she was not alone, that she was building something new and precious. One afternoon, while sitting in her studio, she felt her baby move for the first time. Tears filled her eyes as she pressed a hand against her belly. "I feel you," she whispered. "And I promise you'll feel me too. Always." Her fears never vanished completely. There were still nights when doubts crept in, when she remembered Evelyn's icy smile, Richard's cutting words, Melissa's effortless perfection. But Claire clung to the journal, returning to its pages whenever the darkness grew too loud. Each entry became both a letter to her child and a declaration to herself she would be different. She would be the mother she had always needed. The baby shower gifts now filled a small nursery painted in soft yellows and greens. Ben built the crib himself, joking that the uneven screws added character. Claire hung her photographs on the walls, sunsets, wildflowers, children laughing at weddings. She wanted her child to grow up surrounded not by symbols of status, but by images of joy. As the due date drew closer, Claire felt her strength grow alongside her belly. She no longer feared being imperfect because she understood something she had never grasped before. Love was not about perfection. Love was about presence. And she would be present every day for her child. That night, as she wrote once more in her journal, she closed with a vow stronger than any she had spoken before. "You will never wonder if you are loved. You will never have to chase my approval. I am your mother, and that alone is enough." When she set down her pen, Claire exhaled deeply as though releasing years of inherited pain. She looked over at Ben asleep on the couch, one arm draped over a baby blanket he had been folding, and smiled. For the first time, she believed with certainty that she could break the cycle. She was not her mother. She never would be. And as she drifted off to sleep beside her growing child, Claire felt stronger, surer, and more determined than ever before. She was ready not for a perfect motherhood, but for a different one. The one her child deserved. Autumn had settled over Boston with crisp winds and leaves crunching beneath every step when the phone call came. Claire listened in silence as her aunt explained that Jack, her mother's younger brother, and one of the few relatives who had always treated her with warmth had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The grief hit her in waves. Jack had been one of the rare constants in her life, showing up at recitals, sending birthday cards, even walking her down the aisle when her own father had chosen not to. The thought of saying goodbye felt unbearable, yet she knew she had to honor him. When she booked her flight to Chicago where the funeral would be held, Claire made a deliberate choice. Instead of staying in her parents' sprawling home, she reserved a modest hotel room nearby. The decision was less about convenience and more about protection. She couldn't risk being drawn back into the suffocating dynamic that had once defined her. The church where the service was held overflowed with people, a testament to Jack's generosity and the impact he had on his community. Bouquets of carnations lined the altar, their scent mingling with the faint aroma of polished wood. Claire sat near the middle pews, Ben's supportive hand clasping hers. She felt her parents' presence before she saw them, Richard's commanding stride, Evelyn's carefully composed face. They took their places at the front row alongside Melissa and her children, as though occupying a stage they had long rehearsed for. During the service, a longtime friend of Jack's delivered a moving eulogy. He spoke of Jack's humor, his kindness, the way he never failed to lend a hand to anyone in need. Claire felt tears well as memories flooded back Jack, teaching her to ride a bike, slipping her extra pie at Thanksgiving, telling her she was enough when no one else had. She clutched Ben's hand tighter, grateful for the echo of Jack's belief in her. After the final hymn faded, mourners gathered in the reception hall. Claire approached her parents with measured steps. Richard nodded stiffly, his voice clipped. "Claire." Evelyn gave a restrained, "You look well." There was no embrace, no warmth, only formality. Claire responded in kind, choosing her words with the same brevity. "I'm here for Uncle Jack." It wasn't anger that held her back. It was clarity. She knew why she was there, and it wasn't to mend old wounds. It was to honor the man who had seen her when no one else did. As the reception went on, Claire moved among relatives and friends, trading stories about Jack. She felt a quiet peace being surrounded by those who genuinely grieved him. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Evelyn sitting alone in a corner of the hall. For the first time in Claire's life, her mother looked small. Her shoulders trembled and tears slid down her cheeks as she stared at the floor. Claire froze. She had never seen Evelyn cry, not at graduations, not at weddings, not even in moments of family conflict. For an instant, Claire's heart tugged toward her, aching with the instinct to comfort. But she stayed where she was. She understood this moment wasn't hers to fix. Evelyn's grief belonged to her brother, and Claire would not blur the line between compassion and vulnerability again. Later, as people began to leave, Evelyn approached her briefly. Her voice was hushed, almost fragile. "Thank you for coming." Claire nodded. He deserved it. That was all. No more, no less. They parted without argument, without false reconciliation, just two women standing in the same room with unspoken history between them. When Claire and Ben finally returned to their hotel, she sank onto the bed, exhaustion heavy in her bones. She thought of Evelyn's tears, of the cracks in her mother's armor, and of how easy it would have been to step back into old patterns. But she hadn't. She had maintained her distance, honoring her uncle without sacrificing herself. As she pulled out her journal later that night, Claire wrote, "I saw her cry today. For the first time, I saw her human. But I also saw myself stronger, steadier, unwilling to lose my balance for the sake of a fleeting emotion. I can care, but I don't have to cave." Closing the journal, she felt both sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the loss of Jack, the man who had always believed in her. Relief that she could finally separate grief from guilt, presence from permission. When she turned off the light, she nestled closer to Ben, whispering, "I did it my way this time." And for the first time in years, Claire faced her parents without losing herself. The house still carried the scent of carnations from the funeral when Claire stopped by later that evening. She had not planned on visiting, but her aunt had insisted on a small family gathering to share food and memories of Uncle Jack. The air was heavy with loss, yet lighter than the strained silence Claire usually associated with her parents' home. Laughter from cousins floated through the dining room, clinking glasses and muffled voices creating a kind of uneasy warmth. Claire kept her distance, staying close to Ben and exchanging pleasantries with relatives who had not seen her in years. She had no intention of seeking out her parents beyond polite acknowledgement. But as the evening wound down and guests trickled out, Evelyn approached quietly. "Claire," she said softly, almost hesitant, "could we talk just a few minutes?" Claire hesitated. Her first instinct was to say no to protect herself from yet another dismissal or criticism. But something in Evelyn's eyes gave her pause, a flicker of vulnerability she rarely witnessed. Finally, she nodded. "All right." Evelyn led her into the kitchen. The room was warm, lit by the soft yellow glow of overhead lights. The counters were cluttered with casserole dishes and trays of leftover pastries. For once, there were no servants, no polished perfection, just two women standing in a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and baked ham. Evelyn busied herself rearranging a plate of cookies, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "How are you?" she asked, her voice carefully measured. "I'm fine," Claire replied, though the word felt too small for all that had happened in recent years. Evelyn nodded, avoiding her daughter's eyes for a moment before continuing. "I saw the article about your studio. In the Knot. Your photos. They were beautiful." The words landed awkwardly, as though Evelyn wasn't used to speaking them aloud. Claire blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Praise, however muted, was something she had long ago stopped expecting from her mother. "Thank you," Claire said cautiously. There was a pause, then Evelyn set the cookie tray down with a small clatter. Her voice grew quieter. "I've been thinking, maybe I was wrong. About your wedding. About a lot of things. I'm not very good at showing affection." She exhaled the admission, sounding as though it had been dragged from a place deep inside her. "When I dismissed your day, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I didn't understand. And maybe I should have." The words might have sounded simple to an outsider, but to Claire, they were monumental. Never in her life had she heard her mother acknowledge fault, not even in the smallest matter. Yet here Evelyn stood fumbling through a confession that sounded as raw as it did unpracticed. Claire felt her throat tighten, but she willed herself to stay steady. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "But I need time. I can't forget everything overnight." For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint clink of dishes in the sink were the only sounds. Evelyn pressed her lips together, nodding slowly. "I understand," she whispered. Claire studied her mother's face. She saw the lines etched deeper by grief, the faint redness around her eyes from crying over Jack, and perhaps something else, regret. It wasn't the sweeping apology she had once longed for, nor was it enough to erase decades of wounds. But it was something, a crack in the armor. Still, Claire's instincts reminded her to stay guarded. She had been fooled before, pulled into believing words that never translated into change. This time she would not lower her boundaries so easily. After a long moment, she said gently, "Thank you for talking to me. I need to go now." Evelyn nodded again, her shoulders sagging slightly as though she had hoped for more. But she didn't argue. She didn't lash out. She simply picked up the tray of cookies once more, fussing with them like a woman unsure of what to do with her hands. Claire turned toward the door, her steps measured and deliberate. As she left the kitchen, she felt a strange mixture of emotions, a sliver of hope that her mother might be trying paired with the firm knowledge that she couldn't let hope alone dictate her choices. When she returned to the car where Ben was waiting, she exhaled deeply. She tried to apologize, she said almost disbelieving. "And how do you feel about that?" Ben asked. Claire paused before answering. "Like it's a start. But not enough. Not yet." That night, as she lay in bed, Claire replayed the conversation in her mind. She thought of the way Evelyn's hands had trembled, the uncharacteristic softness in her voice, the simple words, "Maybe I was wrong." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a step. And for Claire, a woman who had spent her life overshadowed by silence and dismissal, even one step felt significant. Still, she resolved to hold her ground. She had learned the hard way that her peace depended on clear boundaries. Whatever came next, she would face it cautiously on her own terms. For the first time in a long time, Claire closed her eyes and drifted to sleep, not with bitterness, but with a wary hope, like a door cracked open just enough to let in a sliver of light. The weeks leading up to Claire's due date passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, baby clothes folded neatly into drawers, and long evenings with Ben assembling furniture for the nursery. The anticipation of Lily's arrival filled their small apartment with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. Claire often sat in the rocking chair by the window, her hands resting on her growing belly, whispering promises to the child she hadn't yet met. Promises of love, of protection, of freedom from the weight of expectations that had once crushed her. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that her phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender's name made her pulse quicken. Evelyn Wilson. The message was brief but unusually soft. "When the baby arrives, I would like to visit. Just for a little while. I promise to respect your space and not interfere. I only want to meet my grandchild." Claire stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. She knew her mother well enough to hear what was unsaid. Evelyn had always been a woman of control, used to orchestrating situations to her liking. Yet here she was offering restraint, promising to stay in the background. Whether it was sincere or strategic, Claire couldn't tell. That evening, she showed the email to Ben. He read it carefully, then looked up. "What do you think?" Claire exhaled. "Part of me wants to say no, to keep her away from this new life. But another part of me, maybe I want to see if she can actually keep her word. If she can be different." Ben squeezed her hand. "Then set the terms clearly. Make sure she knows the boundaries." The next day, Claire replied with a measured response. "You may visit, but only for a few hours at a time. Please understand that Ben and I will decide how Lily is cared for. This is our family, and our rules will need to be respected." She hit send, her chest tightening. Moments later, Evelyn responded simply, "Of course, I understand." It wasn't the end of her worries, though. A few days later, a delivery arrived at their door, an enormous baby gift basket. Packed with pastel blankets, onesies, plush toys, bottles of lotion, and even a set of silver baby spoons, the arrangement looked like something out of a department store catalog. Attached was a card written in Richard's unmistakable handwriting. "Congratulations. We wish you all the best. Dad." There was no phone call, no personal message, just the basket and the note. Claire studied the card, unsettled. Was this his way of extending an olive branch, or just another transaction to ease his conscience? Richard had never been a man of sentiment, and the distance in his words reminded her of every moment he had chosen appearances over affection. Ben noticed her frown. "It's just a gift," he said gently. "Take it at face value." But Claire shook her head. With them, nothing is ever just a gift. There's always a string attached. She tucked the basket into the nursery corner, grateful for the practical items, but unwilling to let it cloud her perspective. The truth was, she couldn't yet trust Richard or Evelyn. Trust, once broken, was not something she was willing to hand back easily. As the days grew shorter and winter crept in, Claire found herself reflecting on what lay ahead. She knew her parents' presence in Lily's life could never mirror the warmth of Ben's family or the steadfast love of her aunt and uncle. But she also knew she didn't need to completely close the door if she could control how wide it opened. One evening, as she folded tiny baby clothes, Claire spoke her thoughts aloud. "They can be part of this, but only on my terms. I won't let them rewrite the rules again." Ben smiled from across the room where he was setting up the crib mobile. "That sounds like control to me, the kind you've always deserved." For Claire, that realization was the turning point. She could allow contact, but she would not surrender the hard-won boundaries that kept her safe. Evelyn's visit, if it happened, would be carefully measured. Richard's gifts would be acknowledged politely, but not mistaken for reconciliation. The power for once was in her hands. On the night she packed her hospital bag, Claire felt a calm she hadn't expected. She knew challenges would come: sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the inevitable tug of complicated family ties. But she also knew she was ready. Ready not just to be a mother, but to stand firmly as the guardian of her new family's peace. As she zipped the bag shut, she whispered to her unborn daughter, "We're going to do this our way. And no one, not even them, will take that from us." The words settled over her like a shield. For the first time, Claire felt not only anticipation, but control. Whatever came next, whether her parents honored their promises or not, she was prepared to protect what truly mattered. The December snow had just begun to blanket Boston when Claire went into labor. The hospital lights felt harsh, the beeping machines steady and relentless, but none of it mattered once she heard the tiny cry that split the air. In that moment, everything else fell away. The years of being overlooked, the disappointments, the ache of being told she was never enough. All of it blurred as the nurse placed a small wriggling bundle against her chest. Lily, her daughter. Claire stared at the dark tuft of hair and the scrunched little face, and tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're finally here." Ben hovered close, his hand trembling as he touched Lily's tiny fingers. His eyes glistened with awe, and Claire thought she had never seen him so overcome. For the first time in her life, Claire felt a sense of absolute completeness. This was her family now. This was where love began and ended. The following day, when visiting hours opened, there was a soft knock at the hospital room door. Claire's chest tightened as Evelyn stepped in her winter coat draped neatly over her arm. She looked older than Claire remembered, grayer, thinner. Her face marked by sleepless lines, but her eyes went immediately to Lily. "I brought something," Evelyn said, her voice unusually tentative. She pulled a small velvet box from her purse and handed it to Claire. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet tarnished slightly with age but still gleaming. "This was yours," she continued quietly. "You wore it as a baby. I kept it all these years. I want Lily to have it." Claire's throat tightened. The bracelet was familiar. She had seen it once in an old photo of herself as an infant on Evelyn's lap, one of the few tender images from her childhood. She had assumed it had been long forgotten, tucked away like everything else of hers that had never been celebrated. "Thank you," Claire said, her voice measured. She glanced at Ben, who gave her a reassuring nod. Slowly, she handed Lily into Evelyn's arms. Evelyn cradled the baby with surprising gentleness, her expression softening in a way Claire had rarely seen. She whispered nonsense words, pressing her cheek lightly to Lily's head. For a fleeting second, Claire glimpsed something she had long wished for: her mother's warmth. Yet even in that moment, she felt herself holding back, her mind alert to every detail. Was this genuine? Was Evelyn here for Lily, or was she using Lily as a way to slip past the walls Claire had built? Ben must have sensed her tension, because he touched her shoulder lightly. Claire leaned close and whispered, "This is a new beginning, but on our terms." The words gave her strength. She would not let nostalgia or longing erase the boundaries she had set. Evelyn's visit might signal a shift, but it did not erase the years of neglect. Trust would not be handed over simply because of a silver bracelet and a tender moment. Evelyn stayed for only a short while, true to her promise. Before leaving, she touched Claire's arm briefly, an awkward gesture that seemed to hover between apology and affection. "She's beautiful," she murmured. You're going to be a wonderful mother." Claire nodded politely but offered no more. When the door closed, she exhaled deeply, her arms tightening protectively around Lily. Later that night, as the snow continued to fall outside the hospital window, Claire watched her daughter sleep in the bassinet beside her bed. She traced the tiny fingers curled into fists, the soft rise and fall of her chest. For years she had struggled under the weight of her parents' judgment, longing for scraps of their approval. But now, holding this child, Claire realized she had all the validation she would ever need. "Everything changes with you," she whispered to Lily. "You are the reason I will stay strong. You are the reason I will never let them cross the line again." Ben, sitting in the chair beside her, smiled softly. "She's going to know love from the very beginning. That's something neither of us had." Claire reached for his hand. "And we'll make sure she never doubts it. Not once." The hospital hummed quietly in the background, but Claire's world had narrowed to the small circle of light that was her daughter and her husband. Whatever storms her parents might still bring, she now had an anchor. And for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face them without fear. This was the start of something new. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, at least, not yet. But a new chapter. One written on her terms, guarded by the unconditional love she had vowed to give her daughter from her very first breath. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Richard finally arrived at the hospital. Evelyn had already visited once, bringing the bracelet and leaving Claire with emotions that were still raw and unsettled. Richard, however, had been absent until now. Claire half expected he wouldn't come at all. He had always been the more distant parent, the one who measured worth in achievements and reputations, never in small gestures of care. When he stepped into the room, Claire noticed he looked older. His suit, though neatly pressed, seemed to hang looser on his frame, and his once dark hair was now entirely gray. For a moment he stood silently at the doorway, his gaze fixed on the bassinet where Lily slept. Claire braced herself, uncertain of what to expect. Without a word, Richard approached his movement slower than usual. Claire lifted Lily gently and held her out. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked, her tone cautious. To her surprise, he nodded, his expression softening in a way she had rarely seen. He took the baby into his arms, cradling her awkwardly at first, then more securely as he adjusted. Lily stirred but did not cry. Her tiny face relaxed against his chest. Richard stared at her with an intensity Claire could not decipher. After a long silence, he said almost to himself, "She has your chin, that stubborn little point, just like her mother's." Then, with the faintest trace of a smile, he added, "It's a good thing. Determination will take her far." Claire blinked, stunned. For as long as she could remember, her stubbornness had been criticized, dismissed as a flaw. She had been told to be more like Melissa, more agreeable, more polished, more ambitious in the right ways. To hear her father describe that same trait as a strength, especially in front of her daughter, was disorienting. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched him searching for the catch, the inevitable comparison, the subtle judgment that usually followed. But it never came. Richard simply continued to rock Lily gently, his eyes fixed on her tiny face, as though memorizing every feature. For the first time in decades, Claire saw her father without the armor of expectations and superiority. He wasn't the imposing lawyer, the man who lectured her about practicality and dismissed her career. He was just a grandfather holding his granddaughter stripped of pretense. "Dad," she said quietly, "thank you for coming." He looked up briefly, his eyes meeting hers. There was no lecture, no dismissal, just a nod. "She's beautiful, Claire. You've done well." The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of something she had longed for her entire life. Not perfection, not comparison, just acknowledgement. Ben, sitting nearby, watched the exchange with quiet interest. Later, when Richard had left, he leaned toward Claire and said, "I think he meant it." Claire exhaled slowly, still processing. Maybe. Or maybe he's just softening because she's a baby. Everyone loves babies. Maybe Ben agreed. But it looked real to me. That night back at home with Lily nestled between them in her crib, Claire opened her journal. She had started writing letters to her daughter during the pregnancy, capturing her hopes, her fears, her promises. Tonight she added a new entry. Today your grandfather held you for the first time. He said something about me I never thought I'd hear from him, that stubbornness is a good thing. Maybe people can change even after years of being set in their ways. I don't know how much, and I don't know for how long, but it gives me hope. Not for him, but for us. For the idea that you'll grow up in a world where love can look different from the one I knew. Claire paused, tapping the pen against the page. She didn't want to romanticize the moment, to forget the years of distance and the wounds that still lingered. But she also couldn't deny the shift she had felt. A crack in the wall. A glimpse of something she had once believed impossible. When she finished writing, she closed the journal and looked at Lily asleep in the soft glow of the nightlight. Her daughter's presence had already begun to transform the people around her. Evelyn's gift, Richard's words, small steps perhaps, but meaningful. Claire knew she wasn't ready to forgive. Forgiveness would take time if it ever came at all. But tonight, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her father was capable of more than she had given him credit for. And that realization, fragile as it was, felt like the beginning of a new chapter. She kissed Lily's forehead gently and whispered, "We'll see where this goes, sweetheart. But no matter what, you'll always know your worth." The backyard was strung with colorful paper lanterns swaying gently in the summer breeze. A table covered in a bright tablecloth held a small cake topped with a single pink candle surrounded by trays of finger food and bowls of punch. Balloons in shades of pastel bobbed at the edges of the lawn, tied to wooden chairs set up in a loose circle. Children's songs played softly from a speaker, filling the air with cheerful notes. It wasn't extravagant, but it was warm, joyful, and exactly the kind of celebration Claire wanted for Lily's first birthday. Friends from Claire's photography studio had come carrying gifts wrapped in simple brown paper with ribbons. Ben's colleagues, a handful of fellow teachers, mingled easily with the guests, laughing as they helped corral the children running through the grass. Claire's aunt and uncle were there too, their smiles wide as they watched Lily toddle clumsily between outstretched arms. This was the family Claire had built, the people who had stood by her through years of struggle, who had celebrated her victories without condition. As she moved among them, offering drinks and adjusting decorations, she felt a wave of gratitude. Still, one thought lingered. A week earlier, she had written invitations by hand, including one for her parents. She hadn't expected much. She knew better than to set her heart on their presence. But she had decided to extend the invitation anyway, not for their sake, but for hers. She wanted to know she had done her part without regret. The party had just begun when she saw them. Richard and Evelyn arriving together, walking slowly up the path to the backyard. They weren't dressed for a gala or a country club event. Richard wore a simple polo shirt and khakis. Evelyn had on a modest summer dress. There were no designer handbags, no grand entrance, no expensive gift bags dangling from their arms. Just them. For a moment, Claire froze, unsure how to feel. But then she noticed they were on time. Not late, not making an appearance for show, but here at the very start, ready to be present. "Mom." "Dad." She greeted, her tone cautious but polite. "Claire," Evelyn said softly, her gaze shifting quickly to Lily. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she called out as though the baby could understand. Richard bent down, extending his hands as Lily toddled toward him. He scooped her up and she giggled, grabbing at his graying hair. Richard chuckled, unbothered. It wasn't grand, it wasn't an apology, but it was something. Claire guided them to the circle of chairs where the others were gathered. The atmosphere remained warm. No one seemed uncomfortable. The guests treated Richard and Evelyn as just another set of grandparents. No special treatment. No whispered gossip. Claire found herself relaxing, though she kept her distance, emotionally observing more than participating. When it came time for the cake, everyone gathered around the table. Claire helped Lily press her tiny hand against the frosting, earning laughter from the crowd. Ben lit the single candle, and the group began to sing. Claire's voice wavered slightly as she joined in, overcome by the simplicity of the moment. She glanced at her parents. Evelyn clapped along softly, her expression tender. Richard stood close, Lily perched on his hip, helping her lean forward to blow out the candle. For once, there was no critique, no overshadowing, just presence. After the song, Claire cut slices of cake, handing them out to guests. Richard and Evelyn accepted theirs with quiet gratitude, making no demands, offering no comparisons. It struck Claire that this, more than any apology, was what she had always needed from them, to simply show up and be part of her life without conditions. As the afternoon wore on, the party carried the easy rhythm of laughter, games, and chatter. Claire looked around the yard, her heart swelling at the sight of the people gathered: Ben, her anchor, her colleagues, her chosen family, her aunt and uncle who had never once failed her, and now cautiously her parents present in a way they hadn't been for so long. She knew better than to believe everything had changed. Decades of wounds couldn't be erased by one birthday party. Trust was still fragile. Boundaries were still necessary. But she could also acknowledge what was true in that moment they had come. They had been there without fanfare or excuses, and that meant something, however small. As the sun dipped lower and the lanterns began to glow, Claire sat beside Ben Lily, nestled between them, with frosting still on her cheeks. "Look at her," Ben whispered, smiling at their daughter's sleepy eyes. Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. "This is it. This is what matters." She didn't need her parents' approval to validate her life. She didn't need Melissa's shadow to vanish. What she needed was right here, the people who showed up, who stood by her, who celebrated her without condition. When Richard and Evelyn said their goodbyes later that evening, they didn't bring up the past. They didn't promise more than they could give. They simply hugged Lily, thanked Claire for inviting them, and left quietly. Claire watched them go, then turned back to the yard still glowing with the remnants of celebration. She smiled, knowing with certainty that her true family was already here. The birthday balloons were still tied to the fence, now drooping in the evening air. The echoes of laughter lingered faintly, and the backyard bore traces of the celebration: a few crumbs of cake on paper plates, chairs scattered where guests had sat, the faint smell of barbecue drifting into the night. Claire stood at the doorway, Lily asleep in her arms, her heart full from the day yet touched by a familiar emptiness. Melissa had not come. It hadn't surprised her. Still, she had hoped against her better judgment that her sister might appear even for a few minutes. A text message, a call, anything to show she remembered. But the phone had stayed silent all day. As Claire laid Lily in her crib, she thought back to other moments marked by her sister's absence. When she and Ben had married, Melissa had sent a wedding gift, a beautifully wrapped silver picture frame, but she hadn't come to the ceremony. The note tucked into the box had been polite, distant, almost perfunctory. "Wishing you the best in this new chapter." Claire had placed the frame in a drawer, unable to look at it without feeling the sting of what was missing. Even before that, there had been patterns. Birthday cards arriving late, sometimes unsigned except for Melissa's neat scrawl of her name. Congratulations for achievements that always seemed measured as though Claire's successes were less worthy because they couldn't be compared to medical degrees or surgical accolades. Melissa had never been openly cruel, but her silence had always spoken louder than words. Standing in the quiet house, Claire realized how much energy she had wasted waiting for something different. Waiting for Melissa to call, to acknowledge her, to be the sister she had once imagined they could be. That hope had been a burden, one that weighed heavily because it was never satisfied. Ben entered the room, slipping an arm around her shoulder. "Long day," he said softly. "She didn't come," Claire whispered, though he already knew who she meant. He kissed her temple. "She hasn't been there for years, Claire. Maybe it's time to stop waiting." Claire closed her eyes. The words were simple, but they struck deep. He was right. She had built her life on waiting, waiting for approval from her parents, waiting for affection from her sister. But what had waiting ever given her except disappointment? Later that night, after Lily was settled, Claire sat at her desk. She opened her phone, scrolling through old messages from Melissa. They stretched back years, an archive of polite but distant words. "Congratulations on the studio. Happy birthday, hope it's a good one. Sorry I can't make it, busy week at the hospital." Each one was another reminder of the distance between them. She hovered her finger over the delete button, hesitating. Part of her resisted, afraid that erasing the messages would erase the hope she had clung to. But another part, the stronger part, knew the truth. Keeping them only tethered her to expectations that would never be met. With a steady breath, she pressed delete. The messages vanished, and with them, a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. The release was quiet, not dramatic. There was no sudden surge of triumph, no rush of anger or grief. Instead, there was peace. The kind of peace that comes not from gaining what you want, but from letting go of what you cannot have. The next morning she woke early and found Lily awake in her crib, cooing softly. Claire lifted her daughter into her arms, pressing a kiss to her tiny forehead. In that moment she felt no longing for Melissa's presence. She didn't need her sister's acknowledgement to feel whole. She had Ben, she had Lily, she had the family she was building day by day. Later, as they cleaned the yard from the party, Claire shared her decision with Ben. "I deleted all her old messages," she said simply. He paused, then smiled gently. "Good. That's a start." Claire nodded. "I can't keep waiting for her to be someone she's not. I've done enough waiting. It's time to live." The words felt final, but not bitter. There was no anger left, only clarity. As the sun climbed higher, lighting the remnants of balloons and the chalkboard sign that still read, "Welcome to our celebration," Claire understood something essential. Family wasn't defined by blood alone. It was defined by presence, by love, freely given, by the willingness to show up even when it wasn't easy. Melissa had chosen her silence. Claire was choosing peace. That evening she wrote in her journal, the one she had started during her pregnancy. Her words flowed easily. "Today I learned that letting go is not losing. It is gaining freedom from expectations that will never be met. Melissa's silence no longer defines me. What defines me is the laughter in our home, the love we share, and the little girl who will never doubt her worth." She closed the journal with a sense of finality. The chapter with Melissa wasn't over family ties, rarely ended completely, but her dependence on that relationship was. She had released the hold it had on her heart. And in that release, she felt lighter, freer, more whole than she had in years. The house was quiet after dinner. Ben was in the kitchen rinsing dishes, and Lily was asleep in her crib, the soft hum of the baby monitor filling the silence. Claire settled into her armchair with a cup of tea, ready for a rare moment of calm. That was when the phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her breath caught. It was Melissa. For a long moment she just stared, her hand frozen. It had been months since their last indirect exchange, the unanswered email where Claire had exposed the truth about Hawaii and the loan. Since then, Melissa had remained silent, just as she always had when things grew uncomfortable. Claire debated letting the call go to voicemail. But curiosity mixed with something deeper, perhaps the old longing for connection, made her swipe to answer. "Claire." Melissa's voice was hesitant, fragile, unlike the confident, clipped tones Claire was used to. Are you doing okay?" Claire didn't answer right away. The question, so simple on the surface, carried a weight it had never carried before. She could hear the strain in her sister's voice, a tremor that betrayed vulnerability. After a pause, Melissa continued, her words tumbling out. I didn't know who else to call. The divorce was finalized last week. And Mom, she keeps telling me how to raise the kids like I'm incapable of making a single decision on my own. It's too much." Claire closed her eyes. A flood of memories surged, years of being dismissed, overlooked, silenced in favor of Melissa's spotlight. Birthdays overshadowed achievements, ignored affection rationed, as if she didn't deserve it. And yet beneath that, she also felt a flicker of compassion. Melissa, the golden child, was finally experiencing the weight of Evelyn's expectations, the same weight Claire had carried all her life. For a moment, Claire almost softened, almost reached for the old role of the overlooked sister, eager to prove her worth by offering comfort. But she stopped herself. She had spent too many years being Melissa's shadow, a convenient figure to absorb frustration, to hold pain without acknowledgement. She took a steady breath. "If you need someone to listen," Claire said carefully, "I'm here. But I won't be your shadow anymore. I won't let you unload on me because Mom frustrates you. I deserve better than that." There was silence on the other end, a silence thick with surprise. Claire imagined Melissa blinking, maybe even frowning, unused to hearing her younger sister speak with such firmness. "I didn't mean," Melissa began, but her voice faltered. "I know you didn't mean it," Claire cut in gently. "But that's how it's always been. I've been the place where the family's disappointments landed the one who didn't matter as much. I won't take that role anymore." Melissa exhaled sharply, as if absorbing a blow. "So you're saying you won't help me? I'm saying I'll help if you want me as a sister, not as a shadow," Claire replied. Her tone was steady calm without anger. "That means respect. That means treating me as an equal, not someone to vent at and forget about once you feel better." The line went quiet again. Claire waited, her heart beating steadily, but without the desperation that had once defined her interactions with her family. This time she wasn't clinging to Melissa's approval. She was holding her ground. When Melissa finally spoke, her voice was subdued. "I don't know if I can do that right now." "Then call me when you can," Claire said softly. Another pause, and then the line disconnected. Claire set the phone down slowly. She didn't feel the familiar ache of rejection, nor the burning resentment that used to accompany every interaction with her family. Instead, she felt something new: strength. She had drawn a boundary, and kept it not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Ben walked into the room, drying his hands on a towel. "Who was it?" he asked. Melissa Claire replied. He raised his eyebrows. "And she wanted to talk. But I told her I wouldn't be her shadow anymore." Ben smiled, pride clear in his eyes. "Good. That's the strongest thing you could have said." Claire nodded. She felt it too. Not triumphant, not cruel, but grounded. For the first time in her life, she had spoken to her sister not as the forgotten one desperate for scraps of attention, but as a woman who knew her worth. Later, as she checked on Lily before bed, she leaned over the crib and whispered, "You'll never have to earn my love. You'll always know where you stand." Walking back to her room, she realized she had never felt more certain. She didn't need Melissa's approval. She didn't need Evelyn's acknowledgement. She had drawn the line that had always been missing, and in doing so, she had freed herself. That night, Claire drifted off to sleep with a calm heart. For the first time in years, she wasn't defined by what her sister did or didn't give her. She was defined by the boundaries she set, by the respect she claimed, and by the family she was building with Ben and Lily, a family where love was unconditional and no one was forced into the shadows. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that settled only after a long day of chasing after a toddler. The toys were neatly stacked in bins, the kitchen counters cleared, and Lily was asleep in her crib, her steady breathing audible on the monitor beside Claire's desk. Ben had already turned in for the night, leaving Claire alone in the glow of a desk lamp. On the desk lay a stack of stationery and a simple wooden box that had belonged to her grandmother. Claire picked up her pen and hesitated for a moment, staring at the blank sheet of paper. She had been carrying the idea for months, writing a letter to Lily, something her daughter could open one day when she was old enough to understand. A message across time, a gift of words to carry the lessons Claire had learned the hard way. She began slowly, the pen scratching against the paper. "My dearest Lily, by the time you read this, you will be 18. Maybe you'll be about to leave for college. Maybe you'll be chasing dreams I can't yet imagine. Whatever your path, I want you to know something that took me almost 30 years to learn. You never, ever have to earn my love." Her hand trembled as she wrote, but she pressed on. When I was your age or younger, I thought love was something I had to fight for, something I had to prove I was worthy of. I thought being loved depended on perfect grades, the right career, the right choices, the approval of people who seemed impossible to please. But that was wrong. Love, real love, doesn't work that way. I learned too late that I was enough all along. I hope you never have to learn it late. I hope you never learn it through tears. She paused, tears welling in her eyes, and placed the pen down for a moment. The words pulled her back through her own history childhood dinners, where Melissa's achievements were paraded, while hers were dismissed, the sting of her mother's cold words, the way her father's approval always dangled just out of reach. Then the day of her wedding when they chose Hawaii over her. And the years since, where she had clawed her way out of the shadow into her own light, building a business, a marriage, a home that reflected her true worth. She picked the pen back up, determined. I have stumbled, Lily. I have carried wounds that shaped me in ways I wish they hadn't. But those wounds also taught me what I refuse to pass on to you. You will grow up knowing without question that your mother's love is permanent, unconditional, and unshakable. You will never have to wonder if you are enough. You already are. The tears spilled, then sliding down her cheeks as she kept writing. I will cheer for you whether you are on a stage accepting an award or simply sitting quietly with a book you love. I will celebrate the choices that make you happy, not the ones that make others look at you with pride. And if you ever doubt yourself, I will remind you of who you are until you can see it again for yourself. Her hand cramped, but she continued, the words flowing faster now as if the dam had broken. I learned love too late, she wrote, but my hope is that you will never learn it through pain. My hope is that you will walk through this world confident, not because others tell you you're worthy, but because you know it in your bones. And if you forget, this letter will be waiting, a reminder that from your first breath you were cherished. Claire set the pen down, breathing deeply. The letter was not long, but it was enough. It was her heart poured out, condensed into a few pages that carried everything she wanted her daughter to know. She folded the pages carefully, slipped them into an envelope, and wrote, "To Lily on your 18th birthday" across the front. Then she opened the wooden box and placed the envelope inside, nestled among a few keepsakes she had already set aside. A photograph of Lily as a newborn, a hospital bracelet, a pressed flower from the first bouquet Ben had brought her after Lily's birth. She closed the box gently and rested her hands on top of it. For the first time, she felt as though a circle had closed. The part of her life defined by seeking approval, by being the invisible child, by fighting for love that was never freely given, that cycle had ended. In its place, a new one had begun, a cycle of unconditional love she was determined her daughter would grow up inside of. Ben appeared in the doorway, sleepy-eyed. Still up? He asked softly. Claire smiled through her tears. Just finishing something important. He walked over, glanced at the box, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Lily's lucky to have you, he whispered. Claire shook her head gently. No, I'm the lucky one. As she turned off the lamp and carried the box to a safe spot in their closet, she felt lighter. The letter was more than words to her daughter. It was a declaration, a line drawn between the life she had endured and the life she was now creating. The cycle was closed. But as she peeked into Lily's room one more time before heading to bed, she knew another cycle, bright, hopeful, and full of love, was just beginning. The first days of January brought with them a crisp New England chill, the kind of cold that made the breath rise in white puffs against the gray sky. Inside Claire's home, though, the air was warm with the hum of conversation, the scent of coffee, and the sound of Lily's laughter echoing down the hallway. It was the first time in years that both of her parents had agreed to visit her home together. Claire had been cautious, preparing herself for whatever tone the gathering might take. She told herself this was not about reconciliation. Not yet, it was simply about letting them see her life as it was now on her terms. The visit had gone more smoothly than she expected. Richard, while still reserved, had played with Lily on the floor, handing her blocks, and smiling faintly when she babbled back at him. Evelyn had wandered the living room, taking in the family photographs displayed on the shelves. Ben lifting Lily high into the air, Claire behind her camera with sunlight falling across her face, snapshots of laughter and everyday joy. For once, Evelyn had not commented critically, had not asked why there were no formal portraits or whether Claire should invest in a proper family photo session. Instead, she had only nodded quiet and pensive. As the afternoon waned and the winter sun dipped lower in the sky, it came time for them to leave. Richard carried Lily's coat to the hallway while Evelyn lingered by the door, her eyes fixed on Claire. There was hesitation there, an uncertainty that Claire had rarely seen in her mother. Finally, Evelyn stepped forward. "Claire," she said softly, her voice lacking the sharpness it so often carried, May I hug you?" The request startled Claire. For so many years, touch from her mother had been perfunctory at best, withheld at worst. But she nodded, and Evelyn stepped into her arms. The embrace was tentative at first, then firmer, but Claire felt the faint tremor in her mother's body. Evelyn's composure, always so tightly wound, seemed to slip for a moment. "I didn't know how to love you the right way," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking. "But I am trying to learn." Claire did not respond in words. Instead, she simply let the hug linger a heartbeat longer before stepping back. She managed a small smile, one that carried both grace and boundaries. She had waited years to hear something like this, but she no longer needed it to define her worth. As Richard and Evelyn departed, waving briefly from the driveway before their car disappeared down the street, Claire remained at the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the frame. She felt no rush of vindication, no triumphant surge. What she felt instead was clarity. For the first time, she understood that forgiveness was not about erasing the past, but about refusing to let it rule her present. Later that evening, when the house was quiet and Lily was asleep, Claire walked into her studio. The space was alive with light even at night, thanks to the large windows that overlooked the city. On one wall hung her favorite photograph, a candid shot of Ben cradling Lily as the little girl reached out to touch his face, both of them laughing their joy, unposed and real. Claire stood before the photograph for a long moment. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. She thought of the little girl she had once been, standing at the edge of family portraits, waiting for a touch, a word, an acknowledgement that rarely came. And she thought of the woman she had become, no longer waiting, no longer chasing after approval that was never freely given. "I don't need them to know I'm enough," she whispered to herself. "I already know it." The words settled into her chest, like a final piece clicking into place. It was not bitterness that she felt, but liberation. Her victory was not about revenge in the way her parents might imagine. It was about standing firm in her own worth, about knowing that she had built a life defined not by their judgment, but by her own values. She turned off the lights in the studio and stepped back into the warmth of her home. Ben was in the living room, a book in his hands, waiting for her. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching, their silence comfortable. Lily stirred briefly in her crib, then quieted again, the soft sound of her breathing filling the monitor. This was her world now. This was her family. And in that moment, Claire knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Tomorrow would bring work challenges, new clients, and the endless rhythm of building her business and raising her daughter. But tonight, as she rested her head against Ben's shoulder, she felt ready. Ready for the future, ready for the life she had claimed, ready for every new beginning that waited. The cycle had closed. The shadows of her past no longer held her. The final drop had fallen not in bitterness, but in strength. Claire had won not by defeating her parents, but by refusing to let them define her. She had chosen herself, her love, her family, and that she knew was victory enough. If you've stayed with me through Claire's journey, you've seen more than just a story of family conflict. You've witnessed what it means to stand up for yourself after years of being overlooked, to draw boundaries when others try to diminish your worth, and to finally choose love and respect over approval that never came. Her victory wasn't loud or vengeful. It was quiet, steady, and far more powerful. It was the kind of victory that comes when you realize your life is yours to live, not theirs to control. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand your ground with family to say no when their expectations tried to silence who you really are? Have you ever had that moment when you stopped waiting for approval and started living on your own terms? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs tonight. And if this story resonated with you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey of resilience, of drama, of standing tall against the odds. Together, we're building a space where stories like Claire's are not only told, but honored. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living well with dignity on your own terms.